Today I'm here with best-selling author Bruce Feiler, who is the author of his newest book, Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age. We spoke before, Bruce, about your book, The Secret of Happy Families, and I quote that so frequently. I thought it was an extraordinary book. I will say you have outdone that book with this book, and everybody should go out and get it. Let me start with how you start the book. So the book, you jump right out of the gate telling your own story, that you experienced three huge disruptions in your own life: a cancer diagnosis, personal financial crisis, and your father's attempt to take his own life. And it led you down this whole path. Can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, it's nice to be with you. I feel like we've been on this journey for a number of years together now, and it's nice to be with you again. And thank you for those kind words. We're having this conversation in the middle of what I call a lifequake, right? This massive change where life seems to be coming at you from all directions, and it has aftershocks that last for years. And I got interested in these periods because I went through one, as you just said, the cancer and my dad trying to take his own life, financial troubles. And what I found, Susan, was that as I told people about this, everybody seemed to have a similar experience in their lives, right? My wife had a headache and went to the hospital and died. My teenage daughter has an anxiety disorder and tried to cut herself. My boss is a crook. Everybody was saying the same thing, which is like, the life I'm living is not the life I expected. So I went on this massive journey, crisscrossing the country, collecting what became hundreds of life stories of Americans of all ages and walks of life, all 50 states. People lost homes, lost limbs, changed careers, changed religions, got sober, got out of bad marriages. And at the end of this, I had 1,000 hours of interviews. And I spent a year with a team of 12 people kind of combing through these, trying to find ideas that could help all of us in times of change. And so kind of the big idea that emerged from this is that the idea of a linear life, that we're going to have one job, one home, one relationship, one source of happiness from adolescence to assisted living, like that's just deader than it's ever been. And it's been replaced by what I call the nonlinear life, which involves many more twists and turns. My data show that we go through one disruptor every 12 to 18 months. 1 in 10 of those becomes one of these lifequakes. And that leads to the life transitions that we'll get into here. But I would say then the kind of the last point of this is that life transitions are a skill that we can and must master. And frankly, to kind of get to the point here, I would say also teach our teenagers and all of our children about.
Okay, so there's this obvious moment. Start in one world, and your book comes out in a whole nother world. And your research revealed that 87% of lifequakes, your word, were personal, and 13% were collective. And here we are in this global pandemic. What do you think about that shift?
Well, what I think about that is, so I had all these lifequakes and we analyzed them. And yes, I analyzed them on 2 metrics. As you say, 87% were personal and only 13 were collective. I also did voluntary and involuntary. And this was quite interesting, actually, because it turned out to be almost half and half. So 53% are involuntary. So an involuntary transition would be, you get a diagnosis, you get into an accident, you get fired from your job. But 47% were voluntary, like people leave a marriage, right? Or they start a new venture, or they change religion or sexuality or something like that. And what's interesting is that I was born in 1964. So I'm nominally a baby boomer at the very end of the baby boom. And I looked at this and I thought, wow, 47% are voluntary, like good for us. Like we are embracing the nonlinear life. But I had all these millennial coders in my, on my team, and they were like, whoa, 53% of transitions are involuntary, like life comes at you. And that was interesting. So then I layered these on top, and it turned out that the smallest category was collective involuntary. Well, here we are in this collective involuntary lifequake. So a collective involuntary lifequake would be a tornado, a natural disaster, 9/11 comes up a lot. Well, here we are in this collective involuntary lifequake. In fact, I would go one step further and say that the pandemic is a collective involuntary lifequake, but Black Lives Matter and this whole reckoning with racial, the legacy of racial injustice in this country is a collective voluntary lifequake. So there we kind of have one of these pileups, as you know. There's something deceptive about this collective involuntary moment, right? Because on the one hand, we're all going through it together, but on the other hand, the way you're going to experience it, like, so that the life quake is shared, but the life transitions that each of us are going to go through are going to be different as a result. So you may want to move, and I may, I may want to, get sober, and somebody else may want to change their religion, and somebody else may want to rethink their career. So that it gets to this larger thing that I think is worth saying here, which is that the life quake can be voluntary or involuntary, but the life transition must be voluntary. You have to lean in and choose to take the steps. So everybody listening to us may have stayed awake last night or sat with a cup of coffee staring out the window this morning thinking, how am I going to change as a result of this entire ecosystem of change that we're in now?
Do you think our kids already deeply understand this notion of a nonlinear life and these life quakes that you described?
I think that they do instinctually understand it, but they also need to be told it. And I think part of our job as parents is to put language to this idea. Let's remember, I think that one of the things that brought us together a number of years ago was that I had done a lot of work when I was writing Secrets of Happy Families on the idea that there are family narratives, right? And that we have an ascending narrative that we all like to tell of we came from nothing and we worked hard and we have a lot. And we have a descending narrative of we have a lot and there was a war or a recession and then we lost it all. But really what we all have is oscillating narratives with ups and downs. And the children who understand that, this is research out of Emory, have a better ability to navigate the world around them. It's the number one predictor of a child's emotional well-being. So I think that they understand, and we need to tell them that life has oscillations and lots of twists and turns. And I'll go a couple of steps further and I'll say that anybody listening to us may think that they do that already, but my experience is that's not true. And I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of parenting groups, is we want to protect our children. We don't want to let them know that we struggle and have anxieties. That's the kind of the coin of the realm these days. So in an age appropriate way, you want to talk to them.
How do we apply your findings to raising teenagers? So your father's message to his grandchildren was write the stories.
Yes. So I think there's at least two things that we can do with our teens. Number one is to embed, remind, talk, badger, use any excuse possible to emphasize a core, simple idea that we don't talk about enough, which is that our life is a story. And that story that we tell about ourselves, where we came from, who we are, where we're going, is not just part of us, it is us in a fundamental way. And with the research, there's a woman named Robin Feiler out of Emory who's done a lot of work on this. She's really the world's leading expert on teen narratives. And that it is when children become adolescents that they first write a story. Do I want to be like my parents or not like my parents, right? Do I want to party? Do I want to do my homework? Am I an athlete? Am I an arts kid? So this is when narrative begins to form. And so using language around the house where you talk about narratives is incredibly important, and telling family history. I'm all about pick a night of the week and that's going to be family history night. Tell your parents when they come over, stop criticizing my parenting, go off and take the kids away from me for a while, tell them family stories. Go to the cemetery. I did this with my kids. It's go to the cemetery day. I'm from Georgia and we live in Brooklyn. And so we went, it was hot, no one had water. It was a memorable experience, not of the kind I was looking for. So use any occasion to tell family history. That's very powerful. Emphasizing times of difficulty like we're in now. That's the first thing. The second thing is to talk about life transitions as a skill. So we have learned that happiness, that habits are skills that you can use if you're going to break it down. That your tennis game is not going to get better unless you practice, right? Your souffle is not going to get souffle-ier. Your relationship, we know we have to work on our relationships. We know that our bodies, we have to work on our bodies. But we don't talk about life transitions. And so life gets us stuck and transitions are the tools to get us unstuck. And so particularly is what adolescents, if you look at college, right, the defining block of kind of late teens, early adults. What is that? That's a classic life transitions. Transitions have three phases. The long goodbye, where you shed, where you say goodbye to the old you. This messy middle where you shed habits and create new ones. And the new beginning, that's exactly what happens in college. What's the average length of a life transition? 5 years. How long is that period? 4, 5 years in a child's life. So if we say this is in fact what you're going to be doing in this period when you separate from us go out into decide where you're going to go to college, go to college or join the army or go to work or take a gap year or whatever it might be. If you look at this as a life transition, then you see it as a way to hone the skills of life transitions that will serve you, because my research shows we're going to spend half of our adult lives in transitions. And this is basically a lifelong sport that no one is teaching us how to play.
So we send them off to college as a rite of passage, but we don't actually put any language around it.
Correct.
Or even give tools to what this could look like. So you have 7 tools for transitioning. Which would be the ones you'd pick?
So choose that demographic. So you have a teenager who's beginning to have more freedom, right? Beginning to drive or to go out more where you're not around, like beginning to think about college, entering college. Transitions involve 3 phases. The first is the long goodbye. And that's about confronting your emotions. So here, if I'm going to give you 3 tips. Number 1, talk about this as an emotional experience. I looked hundreds of people in the eye and said, what's the biggest emotion you struggled with in your transition? Number 1, fear. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to do it? Can I live without this? What do I need money? Like, how am I going to live alone? Whatever it might be. Fear is number 1. Number 2 is sadness. I liked when my mommy protected me. I liked when everything was available for me. And number 3, interestingly enough, was shame. And I think that that's more potent for kids than we realized. I'm ashamed that my friends want me to do this, but I don't. I'm not comfortable doing that. And I feel shame. My grades are not as good as I wanted them to be, or my face may be breaking out, or my body is changing in ways I'm not comfortable with. So I would say the first thing is I would remind kids that this is an emotional experience and it's difficult, and then give them tools like rituals are very good for, what's a commencement speech? What's a farewell party, right? What's a mom going and making the bed at a college? What is that? But these are rituals that help everybody contain the feelings, okay? So number 1 would be identify it as an emotional experience.
So I was thinking that shame might not apply here, but then I was thinking kids who didn't get into the college of their choice, they're so, right? Like, it's definitely woven into this whole experience.
Or don't have the body that they think that they want to have, or are, uncomfortable with sexual experimentation, right? Or make a mistake and don't get the grades and have to kind of report back, or miss the goal at miss the free throw in the basketball game, or trip in the ballet performance. There's a lot of shame. This was shocking to me, but it was so visceral that it's absolutely part of it, and it's absolutely part of it for kids too. So that's the long goodbye. Now let's look at the messy middle. So the messy middle involves 2 things, and that one is shedding certain habits, okay, that maybe sometimes something that you don't like, or maybe something that you do like that you have to say goodbye to. But then I would say creativity. It was a shocking thing. So a tip would be, encourage your child to try something new, because people sing, dance, kind of learn to swim. I mean, all sorts of things that people try. Journaling, for example, is a very valuable thing that people do. So people turn to astonishing acts of creativity. What happened with the pandemic? Baking. Like, everybody was surprised. I was not surprised, because we sourdough'd our way through it. And that, I think, is because the act of kind of getting your hands messy. So I think for a kid, it would be, try something new. And then the last thing I would say, these tools, I have 7 tools, and most of them are associated with the phases, the long goodbye, the messy middle, the new beginning. But one of them floats, as you know, and that is share it. Find someone that can be a confidant for you, who's actually not a parent. And not a relative. And know that different people like different types of support. So some people like comfort, or comforters, like, I love you, Susan, you'll get through it, I believe in you. Some people like nudgers. I love you, Susan, but maybe you should try this, or maybe it's time to start dating again. It's been a couple of years since your spouse died, right? Or maybe you should look for a new job, right? Or maybe you should start to exercise a little bit more, or whatever it might be. And some people like slap. I love you, Susan, but get over yourself. Like, you've been whining and telling the story for too long. It's time to go make a change. I'm sure different of your children respond to different types of advice. And so the point is, don't assume that the kind of comfort and advice and mentorship that you respond to is what the person you're talking to responds to. But Our pediatrician said to my daughters, I have identical girls, when they first became adolescents, something that's really stuck with me. She said, do you have somebody you can tell your problems to? I don't actually care who it is, as long as it's someone. And that, I think, is a great piece of advice for someone going through a transition. Is there somebody you can, commiserate with along the way? Because the thing about a life transition is you feel alone, you feel scared. Like when I had cancer at 43 as a new dad, it's like I'd look out the window here in Brooklyn and I would say, like, you're not on crutches, you don't have this. You just feel achingly alone. And that we know is a huge problem for teenagers in particular, and college kids acutely. You want to make sure that you're not going through a life transition by yourself.
How did this book change you as a parent?
Well, number one, it gave me a language. It helped me realize that transitions themselves are nonlinear. Like it's 2 steps forward and 16 steps back. Like it's not a linear. You don't just say goodbye to the old you and then, shed habits and begin new ones and unveil the new self. It really is a process of looping and entangling. Life is nonlinear, and so are the transitions. So it helped give me a language. It did force me when the pandemic, it kind of empowered me to force my kids to journal for a bit, because actually that is a great way. And then I guess the last thing that I would say is we talk a lot about story, that a lifequake is fundamentally a meaning vacuum, when the normal way that you make sense of the world is just obliterated and sucked out of the room, if you will. And what a transition is a meaning-making exercise.
Okay, I have like 50 more questions and no more time. So what I'm going to tell everybody is that the book is worth getting right now. It is transformative. And Bruce Feiler, thank you so much for your time.
I feel so connected to you, Susan. Good luck, everybody. You know what? The transitions work. We'll get through this together.